might as well get started since we're all here. So welcome everybody to the academic panel, and we're so excited to be here, and we are discussing a really important topic today, which is the future of Beatles research, and where are we going to go with it in the future? And I actually have to, believe it or not, credit my father for this an idea for this topic, because we were talking about, I was getting my books together to go here and all, and he said, what else is there to say about the Beatles? What other books can be written? What other things can possibly be said now? And I thought, that's actually a good idea for discussion. What else is there to say about the Beatles, and what else has been said? So, so my good friend and my co-editor on the book Fandom and the Beatles, for all these years, I contacted him and said, "Hey, let's kick this topic around, shall we?" And he said yes. And so we are here, and we have with us on this panel some terrific scholars who are more than up to this task to talk about. So on the end here, we have Karen Duchaj, yes, indeed, professor of linguistics, and just recently gave a paper at a conference at it's Liverpool Hope University. Yeah, Liverpool, just want to make sure I got the title right. And speaking of Liverpool Hope University, though that's not where the program was when you were there, right? Oh, it was. Oh, okay, because I know it was. Okay, yes. This is Andy Nicholes, who is the co-host of Nicholes, and got his master's in Beatles studies there, and is now a high school teacher at what high school?
Parsippany Hills High School.
Indeed, and so he is an educator in yes, indeed, an educator. And over here we have Ed Chen, who has a doctorate and also is a keen researcher, and we co-host the podcast Toppermost to the Poppermost, which involves quite a bit of research.
More than enough.
More than enough. So Ken, do you want to kick off the discussion?
Sure, Kit. I'd be glad to. This is a topic I think about a lot. I think most of you know that Beatles research and scholarship has really been taking place since the Beatles began. Almost immediately we had books like Love Me Do and others, but things changed significantly, although there are titles that we all know and love from those early period. Of course, Walter Pedrogic and Harry Castleman's books are dear to us. I know I enjoyed The Beatles, an Illustrated Record for a long time by Tony Carr and Tyler, those guys. And then certainly Nicholas Schaffner's The Beatles Forever. It was one of the first books, of course, that had a kind of lyricism to it, and was important in that way. The hardcore stuff was being done by folks like Wilfred Mellors, Twilight of the Gods, but this whole business absolutely changes in 1988 with the release of the recording sessions by Mark Lewison, because suddenly we had a master text, right? We had discographies. We had an understanding in the United States that most of the records we were buying were butchered versions of the original British albums. Of course, the 1987 concretization of the Beatles records onto CD in their British form was a big deal in terms of a lot of this work moving forward. So those were signal moments, and I know I've attempted, and with Kit, as she mentioned earlier, to create collections of essays so that we can publish with scholarly presses, which those imprints are very important in academic life. That's how you avoid perishing if you're in an institution where you publish or perish, because nobody wants to perish, right? No, it's, especially if all you have to do is publish. I mean, if you can stave off death that way, why not? So, in any event, these are questions we think about a lot, and I know that we've seen some extraordinarily important work being done lately in terms of the nature of fandom and being a fan across time, right? We're not privileging in the same way that we were first generation fans. We're understanding the notion of the experience of fanhood across time, you know, particularly now, right, where folks, if they love the Beatles, can immediately go to Spotify and there they are, full flower. You know, how they experience the Beatles, of course, is extremely important because that's how most of the people in the history of time will experience the Beatles, right? What's already happened is already passé. So lots of important questions have been asked in this area. Certainly women's studies in terms of fandom have become important. But when I look at the field, and I'm curious what others here would have to say, when I take a look at it, I'm increasingly concerned about what we don't know, right? About the areas where there's so much important work to be done. And I think one of them has been emerging, and I mentioned this during the panel with Julie Evans, tangentially a little earlier, and that is the commentary from, say, the participants themselves, right? Which we know we can't accept in a scholarly sense as gospel. We often want to. But that kind of bias has no place, of course, in any kind of rigorous scholarship. So, I mean, one project I'm interested in is the assessment of the quotations that we have about the origins of these world-eclipsing, time-eclipsing songs, right? And some of this work we were very fortunate to have in any event and in any form, and we owe such a great debt, as I said earlier, to David Sheff when he was conducting the Playboy interviews in August and September 1980 for asking John Lennon about every song. Imagine if he does not do that. I mean, it's incredible. And of course, that then occasioned, after his senseless murder, poor Paul, right, having to answer endless questions about these songs, being put in a position sometimes to counter them or to accept them wholesale. One project I see that I'm going to start mentioning to my own students when I get back for the fall semester, when I do my fall Beatles course, is the issue of when did these stories start to emerge. So one that comes up again and again with Mal Evans is the Mother Mary, Mother Malcolm story. The romantic me loves the Mother Mary story. I've loved it since I heard it. I loved when Paul said I was having a tough time in the late 60s. And I had a dream and my mother came to me in a dream and said, "Let it be." I love that. I'm not sure it even has a grain of truth at this point, but I still love it and I don't know what to do with it. So you know what I do? I kind of teach them both at this point. Because of course we have Mal writing contemporaneously in his diary what happened, and what happened in Rishikesh when Paul came up with the song. You know, these are interesting concepts. So how do you assess this? Well, one way, everybody familiar with the Oxford English Dictionary?
Yeah.
That mammoth book that when you buy it, well, it comes with its own little magnifying glass because the print is that small. Well, fortunately it's online. And one thing you can do with it is go in and start looking up word origin or phrase origin. One I worked on a few years ago was "Life is what happens while you're busy making other plans." And we know who didn't come up with it, even though we love him, John Lennon. It's from Reader's Digest back in 1957, which, as Jude Kessler points out, Aunt Mimi subscribed to. So who knows, right? And she would, wouldn't she?
Absolutely.
She would. Anyway, I'm almost there. But I think a project that would be interesting would be to do the same kind of excavation, to go back and find out, and this isn't that difficult, when is the moment that Paul began, a guy who's been interviewed for his entire adult life, right, since he was 20, 21. When is that first moment when he said, when he first said that it's my Mother Mary, or when did he first mention that the civil rights era was involved in Blackbird? Was it 1968? Was it 1988? Or even later still, right? So, and these are not these investigations are in no way designed to malign the songwriters. I can't remember half of what I've done today, right? So I am universally prone to forgiving folks for lapses in memory. It's our job as scholars to go out into this world and do this kind of work, right? I had a graduate professor before we met, who said that the best work in biographical studies will be done 50 years after everybody's dead. I think it's probably true, because that's when the long arm of, their lawyers and their intimates are no longer around correcting everything and everyone, and then we can sift through the material, look at what we can prove and not prove with diaries, with people's journals, with photographic evidence, all sorts of other material. The Beatles book, right? The Beatles book monthly, is there a more important source? We can pinpoint so much from that documentation. But I think that's one area where we need to shore up our work, is historical scholarship.
Yeah, absolutely. And of course it gets harder and harder when the internet makes it harder and harder when you talk about, like the false quotes that you just mentioned. I mean, how many times have we seen that on Facebook? The things that John supposedly said, and yeah, right, exactly. I mean, we see that constantly. So let's go down the line here with our panelists in some of the research that you've done, or not necessarily that you've done, but just topics that you've seen. What are some areas that you see that you think, boy, that could really use some more research, or you've seen a lot of falsehoods about it, or what are some things that you've seen? So Ed, why don't we start with you?
Well, okay, I'm going to take this a slightly different direction. I've been reading the Beatles journal, and one of the things I've been seeing is sort of tangentially Beatles-related things. The galaxy being named Lucy, or the first hominid being identified and named as Lucy, and all that always coming back as being, this was a Beatles thing, and it may well be a Beatles thing, but it has almost nothing to do with the Beatles, other than, the guy who made this discovery was a Beatles fan. While that's important, is that Beatles scholarship?
So you're saying, so it's what you're looking for, more direct, subjects that are more directly related to the Beatles. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah. I mean, I have no problem with the fact that they're naming it Lucy after Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds, and great, that's a wonderful fact, and tell us that in the footnotes of your publication in Science and Nature, but does that necessarily go in the Beatles Journal, which is where I've been reading at least a non-trivial number of articles, which are really not what I would call Beatles articles. They are articles which are sort of related to the Beatles. And the other thing is, you do have articles where algorithm discovery, for example, Bag of Words is one of my favorites, and people are now using that to look at, did John write this or did Paul write this? That is a serious use of non-traditional Beatles scholarship toward a Beatles topic, but far too much of what I read is like, okay, we're going to put this in the Beatles Journal because the name was influenced by Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds.
I see what you're saying. Okay. And a little background. There's a fairly new, like last year when it came out.
This is the Journal of Beatles Studies.
Yeah.
At the University of
Yeah, Journal of Beatles Studies at the University of Liverpool, and it's free. It's free online, and if you Google it, it's you can read it. There are a lot of interesting articles from scholars from all over the world, really, about all different. You can really kind of get a sense of where Beatles research is today. You know, it takes all different kind of approaches, sociological, you know, literary, I mean, you name it. It's kind of a young journal, so there's still more issues to be unveiled, but so that's what happens.
But there's a significant percentage which is the kind of article that I describe. Now, I mean, it's not overwhelming in the journal, but, you know, and for years it's been fine. It's even interested me when I've gone and read this in a appropriate journal, but should this go to the Journal of Beatles Studies?
So, Andy, how about you? Particularly, you know, in your time when you were in the Beatles MA program.
Sure. My interest really always lied in historiography and like the writing. And we generally know the narrative. My professor, Dr. Mike Brocken, who's a phenomenal guy. Have you met him?
I know it, yeah.
He used to tell us in class that we generally know the narrative. Yeah, there's some facts that are not always accurate, but we know the narrative. What's interesting is looking at the author's angle. What's their objective? That's more telling than the story in the book. What and why? And the one that he used a lot in class was Albert Goldman. Controversial figure. But a lot of what he researched was accurate. He had a horrible, horrible way of delivering it, but his methods were accurate. And that was a kind of a light bulb moment for me, studying the history of the writing and how it was done. How were the narratives changed and why? Why have these authors done that? I agree with Ed. Like, it's great to let's get the facts done about who said what. But there's so many Beatle books. I mean, Melissa Davis published a bibliography of just Beatles books. She was my cohort before me. And with every passing year, there's more books, some better than others, like tens. But how do we assess all that stuff? You know, and we have to be able to go through a litany of all this stuff and find out what's good and what's not. And that's been my interest, going through all that stuff from back in Liverpool till now.
Andy, so there has certainly been what I have referred to as the Lewison kerfuffle of late. There's a corner of Beatles fandom who are not so happy with Mark Lewison because if you go through, tune in, he has a tendency to conflate quotes. He will take the first part of a quote on a topic from one interview in 1970, the last part of a quote, the last part on the same topic from 1988, smush them together, put an and in between them. And he will footnote, tell you that they came from these two different sources, but if you just read it and don't go to the footnotes, it reads like a single quote. I would like to get everybody's opinion on, you know, what is being claimed on the internet is academic dishonesty. I do not believe that. But I do believe that it's not the most best scholarly method of dealing with these quotes.
I would agree with that. I think if you look at the approach that Cozen and Sinclair have done with their footnotes in the McCartney legacy, they have taken everything from the period of the time. So they're quoting somebody or something that Paul did or Wings did. They're telling you in the time. They're not using a quote that Paul said or somebody said later on. They're pulling everything from the period of the time, which is what Ed's saying Lewison didn't do. Ed didn't tune in. So I agree with you, but I could see where people would have, I wouldn't call it academic dishonesty, right? You know, would you?
No.
No.
You know, on the quotation kerfuffle,
That's my word.
as coined by Ed Chen. I haven't done this level of analysis yet, but I have found that a lot of the quotations are misquoted. So you'll have a John Lennon quote, maybe it's from the Jan Winter interview in 1970, that exists in 4 or 5 different versions. So I do wonder about their methods. Again, I haven't done this work yet, but I have some doubts about. I know I've found quotes that I'm sure are the right one, and then I've done a little cursory research and discovered that the gist of the idea exists in another quote, but it's clearly not the same thing, and yet both are cited from what is supposedly the same interview. So,
Karen, what about you?
Well, having been to and presented at 2 different Beatles conferences this year, the one before, the Liverpool one in March, was actually here in Chicago, was the Beatles subset of the Pop Culture Association. And what I'm discovering going to a lot of these is this interdisciplinarity, and that, you know, there are scholars coming from so many different disciplines that I can sit there and I can, you know, watch a musicologist and hang on as well as I can. And, you know, it helps that I can read music, but, you know, they're probably going to lose me at some point. And so I think it's a good thing that we are entering with so many disciplines, but the other thing that you guys are making me think of, and I saw this in Liverpool as well, is the sort of gamut from a talk or a paper that is universally appreciated and understood. And it's like, I don't know if general interest is the right way, but yeah, everybody's going to want to see that one, and it'll appeal to everybody. And then, you know, because of the publish or perish, you know, many of us have to please our departments who want theory, and they want a very serious theoretical paper or presentation. Otherwise, you're really not, I don't know, earning your credit within the department. And so what that does is it creates these differences. When I gave my talk in Liverpool this last time, I ran out of time, and I started flipping past some of my theory slides, and I said to the audience, you don't want to hear theory anyway, do you? I was very pleased. Someone at the end, when they were asking questions, was, can you go back to that one theory slide? But I think that I don't think we're splitting, but I think we've got different types of things that are falling under the umbrella of Beatles scholarship. And, you know, addressing what Ed was saying about the Journal of Beatles Studies, and is this truly a Beatles Studies paper? If somebody says it is, to me, it kind of is. You know, it's got to have, I don't know, it's got to have something to do with them. It's got to be something specific about them. I guess you can't just like walk into one of these and say, well, you know, I just would like to talk about the C chord. Anybody happy about that? But the other thing, and Wally Podrazik and I were talking about this last night, who is also, by the way, an academic. He teaches at University of Illinois in Chicago. We were talking about how, this gets into what you guys were saying too, how accurate you want to and need to be. And one of the things that I think we have beaten into us in academia, in graduate school, is you better be damned accurate. You better have every little teeny little thing right. And other people, you know, who like go proofread my work, who are just, you know, friends and family, they'll go, will they really care? I said, I don't know if they will care, but I can't put my name on it if I don't care, if I don't. And at the same time, I know that some of it will bore the tears off people and they'll put it down. You know, the book or the paper, it's too dense. It's too theoretical. I can't get through it. I'm so bored, I'm falling asleep reading it. This can't possibly be, you know, what anybody would like to read. And frankly, I love my academic friends, but if I could sit down and like read Nicholes Shafter all the way through again, that would be wonderful, because it's so readable. And he doesn't do what I do. He doesn't, you know, cite scholars and theory and things. And so I think what we are calling Beatles scholarship is maybe getting to be a wider field all the time, what we're putting under that.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, Karen, because, like what Ken and I did in our book, Phantom and the Beatles, a few years ago, was really interesting because, fandom studies was not a thing just, not that long ago. I mean, studying fandom itself, was just not that accepted, at least where, where we got our doctorate. That was...
No, it's considered sort of like navel-gazing, kind of meta sort of stuff. And,
yeah.
but it's an important reflection of the culture, right?
Absolutely. I mean, it is. I mean, it's a reflection of the culture. It's a reflection of history, and so I think that's becoming more and more accepted. I mean, there are more about, as I was researching for my chapter and everything, I saw more and more books on that very subject, fandom studies. So I think that's growing. So I think you're right, Karen, that more and more, and I think also the notion of what is scholarship, that it isn't just academics performing this research. I mean, look at the number of people just in the marketplace here that are, respected Beatles scholars. They're not necessarily doing this from universities.
No, it's worth noting that some of what Karen was citing, of course, are audience issues, right? So I'd rather read Schaffner too than a lot of the scholarly work, unless they're providing us with new evidence. I totally get that. I think at a certain level, the closest analog to the Beatles is Shakespeare, and you can tell when you go to any really good university library, right? Because the Shakespeare shelves, how many shelves? We're going to have like 5 or 6 rows of just solid material, secondary, tertiary, forget just the plays, that's the least of the books, right? James Joyce, folks like that, the moderns often have a lot of material, but Shakespeare is the big one. And the Beatles are rapidly approaching, and maybe perhaps have even eclipsed already, that the level of attention and interpretation that's gone into Shakespeare, and I think deservedly so. And we're going to find out that it's a very big tent, right? That at some level, I'm with you, Ed, but at some level, a book about all of the ways that the Beatles have been iterated and replicated in the world of culture, and how many thises and that's have been renamed. There is an historiological study to do there. I don't know if you want to read that study, but it could exist. One that is often a touchstone in my class, a lot of students are attracted to Paul is Dead. And so that's one I toy with every year, because I'm trying to teach them how to, my students are mostly music students. They want to interpret the music, either in terms of instrumentation and notation, or lyrics and performance, you name it. And when they go there, I sort of question it, and sometimes kind of fence it off as being out of bounds, just for the fact that it occurs outside of the Beatles. I don't want to break it to you, they didn't really come up with those death clues. I'm sorry, yeah, dear. It happens outside of their story. In fact, most of it happens when they're not a band anymore. All really of it happens when they're not we just didn't know it back in 1969, right? And that's our challenge now. When you compare, say, the Beatles with Shakespeare, we know a lot. We know too much. We don't know much about Shakespeare, do we? We know that he left his second best bed to his wife Anne Hathaway, that he had so much when he died, and he died in Stratford. We're not even really sure of his death dates, so we just say it's April 23rd, 1516, no,
I know the year he was born, not the year he died.
1564, 1623? Yeah, so, but
I
we,
didn't know the 64 part, you see.
yeah, I get that. But, you know, so we have such limits on what we know, and yet we've created this industry around Shakespeare. We're doing that for the Beatles too. There's a big test coming for all of us. A big, big test. I'm going to prep you for it right now, and then I'll shut up. But it's a big one. So you guys remember when the Buddy Holly story came out?
Oh, yeah.
You know, I was excited. Love Buddy Holly. How many mistakes were in that thing? I mean, like every damn thing. It was, I mean, over and over and over. But we loved it back in 78. We loved it. It was wonderful to have. You know, it created a new industry in buddy studies, I guess. But our standards now are much higher, right? We were thrilled when Backbeat came out and we got to learn more about the birth of the Beatles. What was that, 1980?
1979.
Yeah, but we loved it when it came out because our idols, I Want to Hold Your Hand, the Zemeckis.
It wasn't anything, that was what we grasped at.
Yeah. So we had a lot of those, the complete Beatles. Sure. That's EAT.
That's still a great one.
Yeah. But we, you know, so we've had this kind of gestation of this material. But now we know a lot, right? So the big test is going to be a film or films by Sam Mendes that the Beatles have been involved in. And they will be coming 2 years, 4 years. They always take longer than people think, right? This is the Beatles going into the world of dramatic scripted film about their own history, which they don't even agree on. So what are we going to get with this, right? Which version of the George Martin story will we get? Was it an audition? Were they under contract? Which version of the Pete Best story are we? Is it going to be like the anthology from the 90s where some truth was elided over because it was just more convenient? You know, how was it, a week or two, or did John decide Paul was in the band that day? You know, so there's going to be a very interesting test for the resulting nature of all of this scholarship when this thing comes out, because we all are familiar, we're learned, this is a learned group, right? We're all familiar with the reviews when they're released, when a big film comes out. I'm on a listserv with Titanic. They love to debate the Jack and Rose story, right?
Those 4 movies won't be for us, though.
Yeah, you don't think so?
No, those movies will be for the beginners or the casual Beatles fan.
But then there's a problem.
I understand that.
But it will be a
For
test.
us.
And by the way, the analog for this, Shakespeare in Love. Right? I've taught Shakespeare a lot. Under duress. You ever taught Shakespeare? It is very difficult. You gotta read it all again. You know, you have to, the preparation is staggering, right? Shakespeare in Love, I found did some damage in my classes. Because I had to explain that, you know, some of that didn't happen.
Right.
Or all of that didn't happen. So we have a big test coming our way. Good point from Tom.
At the risk of heresy, which, you know, even to myself.
Do it.
Who cares? I'm sorry, I can't believe I even said that. But if somebody out there, I mean, a lot of us came into the Beatles like through the Carr and Tyler or through the Schaffner and everything, and it's like, and we're okay. And it's like if someone's introduction to the Beatles has an error here and an error there and an error there, is it going to kill them? I mean, I feel awful saying that because to me it does matter. To me it matters a lot. It's like, no, don't get that wrong. But, you know, I guess I mix a lot with both, you know, the people who are scholars like us and then the people who are like my family and friends. Who are
I think you've got to shun your family and friends.
I think I need to find a new family and friends. Yeah. If they're watching this, it's not true. But you know, there is that. You know, are we being are we talking just to ourselves? Are we being accurate just to ourselves and for the public, for people outside the hotel?
Here's a
Doesn't matter.
counter question then. So, Oppenheimer, how right does the science need to be?
I'm gonna say it needs to be pretty darn right.
And we are capable of being pretty darn right about the science. And if we can, we should.
Right, yeah.
We should. These are all, you make really valid points. I don't disagree with the brute truth of it, right? What the number one, but you disagrry with yourself, and that's, we're going to talk about that later, privately. But what is anybody? I bet somebody in here knows this. So my first cohort of Beatles, no, my second cohort of Beatles students at Penn State were excited by one film. Anybody know what it is?
Across the universe?
Boom!
Yes, yes.
They love it. My kids love it.
Yeah.
Now, it's not trying to say that this is what happened. It is very clear that it is a dramatic, scripted, musicified fiesta of fun, right? And what a use of girl at the beginning. That is so dark and wonderful and twisted. So sure, if this is the way they get there, great. We all got there somehow, right? Like you said, my way is pathetic. It was the cartoons. Those cartoons are bunk. They're not even their voices.
But if it got you into it, then.
Yeah, and then I did the work and I realized, oh, wait a damn minute.
Well, there's also the analogy of, they say history's written by the victor. So this history's written by who's left now. And when everybody's dead, what are we going to be left with?
Better history.
Yeah, well, I'd like to hope so.
Yeah, because that's what's going to happen. If this is, 100 years from now, 200 years from now, a Mark Lewison book is what people are going to read. So it's going to take time. Like it's going to transcend all of us.
I love Mark, but that's not going to be it. It'll all be done again.
After Mark.
Everything is going to be done again.
Interesting.
And we'll be able to do it with this clean slate.
I'd like to hope so, because my real bone of contention with Beatles scholarship and Beatles research is that there's a lot of people who are still alive, and everybody's got their own agenda in this story. So that you're not going to get the same story from different people, and you're going to get it the way they want it told. And when everybody's dead and you can start clean, you might get something a little more accurate, hopefully. You'd like to think they would, but it depends what's left.
But it's hard work, right? So if you've got let's pick on him, I love him, Tony Brando, who has said many things.
Yeah.
Well, then you can almost, like a tree, make a decision tree and assess all of those different, because you can't use everything. But it's a fun problem to have.
Okay, couple random things. First off, what everyone has forgotten about is the internet. You look at the example I'm about to give, Midas Man. When those set photos first came out, everyone was, oh, there are orange amps in 1964. There are not orange amps in 1964. Why are they doing this? Well, it was just a costume test. And then as things have moved on and as we're going to get the film, and I think this is, well, not quite as big a test as
It will be a test.
It is going to be a big test, and it's been screened a couple times. We've seen the trailer. What struck me about the trailer? They got the All You Need Is Love set almost completely right. They got the Comeback Millie sign in there. It's like, they went to the level of detail that it's not just sort of random stuff.
Was that film sanctioned by the estate or no?
I don't, the Epstein, possibly.
I think so.
I think
Porter
so.
was a consultant on it.
Was he?
Yes,
Oh.
and I think, he absolutely was, and I think that it is sanctioned in some way.
Wow.
So, anyway, I have been impressed, other than Jay Leno as Ed Sullivan, I have been
a
Yeah.
whole other story.
I have been impressed with the trailer, and I have actually gone through the trailer and looked at things specifically. You know, some things are more impressive than others. Okay, Brian crossing the Abbey Road crossing, but we don't know the context of that.
Right.
But as I say, the scenes and, well, I mean, the fact that they used the actual Beatles version of Besame Mucho in the trailer and presumably the film, it's like, somebody cared.
Yeah, it's promising. It's promising. Let's throw it out to you guys out there. Yeah, Tom.
So, I believe we need to do the research. I believe that wholeheartedly. And I also believe that we should be listening to what they have to say. However, they do get it wrong. As we know, as the, Paul likes to say, we weren't coming to America unless we had a #1. We know that's wrong. However, how do you feel when Paul sings, nowadays I don't see, you guys weren't around, so how can you, nowadays everybody has their own opinions of who did this and who did that. I don't know how, as for me, I can't remember how they weren't where it was at. Remember the line from early days. You know what I'm saying? So, I mean, and obviously he doesn't want you guys to do the research because he wants you to believe everything, all the great stories that he tells. So when you hear a line like that, how does that make you guys feel?
It doesn't bother me at all. The same professor who told me the great work will be being done 5-6 decades after the principles are gone, and we're part of those principles, frankly, who probably need to be erased. That was awful. We're going to have to spend some time together later. We're going to have to work through some stuff. But, that same professor pointed out that the last person you can trust is the author.
Yeah.
Which is why you have to do that work, right? And when you go and look at the great stories of great artists in history, whether it's Degas, right, Picasso, Shakespeare, etc. Well, scratch Shakespeare because we have very little in terms of the record, but people like Degas are contemporary enough that we have a pretty good record, right? They kept a lot of letters, etc. We can establish what they said, and historical scholars, like the kind that Andy was talking about, can go in and do that work and become a lot closer to the truth. So that's just something you say, right? I remember a very instructive moment when we all started. We had a big cohort at Penn State. We all started at the same time in 1997. And my office was next door to the New Poet. The New Poet, okay? And she had a great new book out. I remember it's called Likely. Her name's Lisa Kaufman. She's a great writer. But someone had written an article, an interpretive piece about her book. Can you imagine? Think for a moment. It had a theoretical apparatus. It was straight, serious literary criticism. She could not believe it. And she didn't know what to do with it. And I said, well, A, you should be glad they're writing about you. That's good. That's good for your longevity. And B, they don't need to ask you what it means. What can they prove in their level of interpretation, right? I had a student once wanted to tell me that the love song of J. Alfred Prufrock was about aliens. He said, can I do that? I said, I don't know, can you? Can you amass the evidence that will prove that, when the women come and go talking about that somehow it's about aliens? I'm all in. There's an A out there waiting for you, or all the other grades. Can you do it? And people don't like to be interpreted, right? What didn't Ringo say in the anthology? That was written in somebody's book or something.
Somebody's book.
Somebody's book or something.
The great boon of the internet is that everything's at your fingertips. The great curse of the internet is that an awful lot of it's not accurate.
Right.
So you can, John Lennon is probably, if not the most misquoted, one of the most misattributed, misquoted people on the internet.
Oh, for sure.
And there's, every time somebody posts that pithy quote about when I was 5 years old, first of all, I want to barf, but aside from that, I'm just like, would he ever say anything this trite? Come on, use your brain. But it's just, and we unfortunately live in an age where not everybody is you guys or us. Everybody wants it easy. They want it spoon-fed to them.
Right.
So if John Lennon, if somebody says John Lennon said that pithy quote, John Lennon damn well said it, and so there's,
Try to get it on a shirt.
Well, yeah, if they have to wait until, like you say, everybody's dead when we're gonna start fresh because.
Which is what I want to circle back to Tom, my partner back there, real quick. With early days and Paul and the lyrics and stuff, I would like to think that when he's gone, you know, I know he feels, oh, you know, you weren't there, right? So how do you know? But if the work is done, and again, I cite Adrian and Alan, because that's the way they're doing it, I think the estates, the families, whatever, will be okay with the legacy is intact.
Yes.
Right? So if we find out something that's not so savory about him, who's gonna care? Really?
Yeah.
Oh, we're still gonna love the music, right? So, I think he said that because I think that came out right around when TuneIn came out, right?
Yeah.
So obviously that was a little dig towards Mark,
Oh, yeah.
of course, probably. So I would just like to think that when he's gone, hopefully a long, long time from now, nobody will care whatever we uncover in this field.
Yeah.
I think, I'd like to think that that's the case, hopefully.
Exactly. Tony, did you have a question?
So Sam Mendes did a historical film a few years back. So do you have concern, or are you satisfied with him making these 4 movies?
I wonder if it'll end up being 4 movies ultimately, because you've got to deal with, if you make 4 different movies from 4 different point of views. A producer I work with brought this up to me. He said, "What if nobody goes to the Ringo film?" Or what, well, they're going to keep score. I mean, that's what everybody does in the business these days. So I think Mendes is perfectly capable of doing this work. I'm talking about our Beatles estates and representatives not agreeing on what the history is. But you know what? I've heard some pretty compelling arguments about how much does it matter. It does and it doesn't. It does and it doesn't. And Karen's damn right. I mean, it does and it doesn't matter. I love Shakespeare in Love. I don't quote it as gospel. There wasn't a Will Shakespeare who met Viola de Lesseps was her name, I think, in the film. That's what I'm talking about. You can almost imagine how the Mendes film came out, right? Poor Jeff Jones probably was dealing with the estates and the reps of the Living Fellows saying, Queen had this big movie, Bowie had one.
Elton.
Where's our film? Let's go. They're not us. They're not. Elvis had, he got his.
Yeah.
But that
If I
Queen movie
qualify.
is so inaccurate about Freddie Mercury.
Yes. And that was sanctioned by the living members of the band.
Yeah.
But it made them a ton of money.
Yeah. Well, and also, just to dial back a little bit to when you were talking about the new poet and the the tenderness of being reinterpreted and criticized, is that it's built into all book writing and all art, but including us, is that somebody's going to review it. And they're going to, and the reviews are studied. When we review something, our chairs of our departments pay attention to our reviews. Well, how did you review this and what did you do that? And so there's a sensitivity. And I get that there's probably with everybody. I think Paul even said, how do you deal with bad reviews? I don't read them. Well, there you go. That's your answer. Don't read them. But I just recently wrote a review for the Journal of Beatles Studies. It's not out yet. And, it's like we are a small community. And you want to accurately review something without stepping on any toes, without making yourself look, more important than you are or anything like that. And I realize I got totally off your question. I apologize for that. But I was thinking about that, how there's that part of it too, that we're well, as long as we're talking about going to therapy together, we're worrying that we're not good enough, worrying that somebody's going to reject our work or something like that.
Well, we should give up and just realize that they will. But hopefully, it'll be much long from now. Everything is always redone, right? Do we think that these box sets we got the last few years are the last versions of Revolver that are coming out?
I'd like to hope so.
My wallet hopes so.
Yeah, I mean, the joke, I show it in class every year, the Men in Black joke about, I gotta buy the White Album
again.
How many times have you bought the White Album? I'm at least 8. There was a hand up.
Yeah, I got a question? Yeah.
Can you all talk a little bit about how we're supposed to be viewing interviews that Ringo and Paul are giving right now in their 80s? Because I understand the idea of you prefer contemporaneous interviews, you're going to have a lot more factual accuracy perhaps, but I'd say on the other hand, I know people who are that age, and they're at an age where they are sometimes a lot more willing to let their guard down. They're less concerned about what people think. And sometimes there's a little more emotional maturity after a certain age, and they can see relationships in their lives differently. So can you talk a little bit about that?
Well, in Paul's case, and Tom I know will agree with me, I think when he's interviewed, he only has like the same 20 questions ready on file to go to the memory bank and just say it. So there's no opportunity to ask him, what about the Bentley on Red Rose Speedway? Not gonna happen. So, right, so I mean, the questions that are asked now to an 82-year-old Paul McCartney are gonna be the same answers we've heard for the last 40 years.
Except, now he's the 82, Paul McCartney's been knighted.
Fair, which was 25 years ago.
Right, and so now a lot of Beatles songs are rooted in Shakespeare.
Back to Shakespeare again.
I got Shakespeare on the brain. But they are. You read the lyrics book.
It's true.
Yeah.
I think I was thinking of Timon of Athens here.
And I think if you were here for a Broad Street presentation, you saw the clip that we showed from Paul from '84 being interviewed, and he pushed back, and that's when he's younger.
Right.
You're gonna get that differently. This is something that Tom and I talk about all the time when we're planning our shows. Let's pull clips when Paul was a little bit more acerbic, and more honest. And when we're older, it just becomes a little easier. Ringo, the same thing. Peace and love.
There is a great example, though, of that emotional maturity with George Harrison. Years later, and I've found several examples, of course George would be this guy, right? Where, for example, talking about the way they left things with the Maharishi in 1968, later going and apologizing to him and saying, we were wrong. They were Magic Alex, for one thing. They were wrong. And he said, and the Maharishi said, you were angels in disguise, basically no worries. But you're right, there can be, those moments are just wonderful, aren't they? Those moments of emotional maturity. The best Mal moment for me, I was on board the second Gary told me this. George Harrison going to their house in, 1984 and saying, I'm sorry for the role I had in Mal meeting the girlfriend in LA, and that's huge.
Yeah.
I mean, who does that? George Harrison. He had a conscience. He felt bad about it. That's really powerful.
Now, do you go to Ringo's place and apologize for what?
He almost certainly apologized to Ringo. Would you bet on it?
I would hope so.
I think just from the way they reacted to each other
Yeah.
in history,
Yeah.
I would almost bet on it.
And in answer to that, the McCartney Lyrics podcast, constantly through there is what we refer to on Fab as, quote, Deep Paul. And while, you cannot necessarily trust what he's saying about factual events, we have to trust that the emotional side of what he's talking about is at least somewhere approaching correct, and he's certainly much more willing to talk about it. Now, part of that is it was interviews that were never intended to come out in a public forum, but still, Deep Paul is throughout the McCartney Lyrics podcast. In particular, we get more Jane Asher talk than we ever got in the rest of his life since the end of the Beatles in that series.
That is such a great point. I'm glad you said that. Factually, yeah, there are big issues, and maybe we have to take those up with Paul Muldoon, right?
Yeah.
He's at that place called Princeton. Maybe that's a question for him. I'm really glad you brought that up, because Paul owns his stuff with Jane Asher very well. There's a quote we get so much mileage of from Paul in class every semester when we start doing songs like I'm Looking Through You, right? And it's Paul's line, I have never had easy relationships with women. Wow. And he variously has said, I've always had difficult relationships with women. You know, and then suddenly we can work it out as making sense, right? You do it my way or we're going to stay up all night talking about this. He owns that. And I think that's pretty impressive. And that's an emotional, just like you said, Ed, that's emotional ownership.
Yeah. We've got time for maybe like one or two more questions. Yeah, Tony.
When Now and Then came out last year, it bothered me that so many people said the song was about Yoko, when we just don't know that for sure. It could be about maintain, it could be about Paul, we don't know. But does that bother you that people will make that kind of comment after the song comes out that they don't know if it's true or not?
I admit it kind of bothers me.
Oh, me too.
Yeah, it bothers me when people jump to conclusions like that, because you know you can read anything into any lyric, right? I mean, it's so easy to do that. I mean, I prefer when the songwriter says it themselves. You know,
I know we're not getting that.
And we sure aren't.
You know, that's whoa, what a great example. And it drives me crazy. We're going to get in our friends Adrian and Alan. Their book is going to blow the lid off that in terms of what folks would like to believe. The folks who like to believe it's some kind of message to Paul are going to be sorely. The evidence simply is not there.
Yeah.
You know, and whatever evidence they thought was there was really made up. And I think isn't that our wishful thinking? How do you deal with wishful thinking in scholarship, Karen, when you find folks, and that's a kind of bias, right?
Yeah. Well, you go as far as you can with your wishful thinking. You know, it's this this talk I just gave in Liverpool was about George's expressions of prayer in his solo career, and you know, part of that is like, okay, I find that stuff really inspirational. So, you know, how do I follow it and make it, how do I indulge, you know, what I enjoy, what I think makes, you know, makes sense about it. Now, in theory, I could be wrong, but I try to stick to, okay, well, this word translates to this word translates to this, like in the chants in Brainwashed. But it's yeah, the wishful thinking, I think the wishful thinking is what gets us started in the first place. Because I tell my students, you know, do you have a hunch about something? Do you have a gut feeling about something? Well, you know, follow it up. Yeah.
Well, I mean, the now and then hunches and gut feelings are based on more or less, at least to a certain extent, questionable facts. Oh, there was this yellow sticky which said "For Paul" written on the tape, which we now know was not even the original tape from John's boombox. Carl Perkins said to Paul and Linda, you know, how did, think of me every now and then, my old friend. Oh, how did you know, says Linda. You know, I've never actually seen that verified or justified as, I don't disbelieve it, but
it's a very sticky answer.
Yes. And then I think a more interesting question is, again, going back to the Mind Games box, I know. Is that a Yoko song or is that a Paul song?
Well, if you read the book, in that section of the Mind Games book, there was a ton of literature and photographs of the Beatles. So it's like the estate is saying, not by putting all that in there, that it's about Paul. That's how I interpreted that. Because when you get to that entry in the song, all of a sudden you start seeing pictures of Paul and the Beatles in that book. And I've always felt that way about I Know. Seeing it in the book now with those images is the estate saying, yeah, we think this is about Paul, without saying it. My take.
Well, it'll be interesting to see what they do with walls and bridges.
That's right.
We may hang if you give me my little flower.
We'll see.
This fellow here had his hand up.
All right, one more question. Yeah.
Beatles Anthologies. It was released 30 years ago almost. and I bought it then, and I just started reading. And I found it very easy to read and very conversational. And this is a lot of facts. And the thing is that they're authorized. So what the Beatles anthology stands is the position to your research or writing or any kind of standard.
Yeah, so authorized, when we were all younger, right, that was the emblem you wanted on the front of your book. The authorized biography of E.B. White. You know, you're going to understand Stuart Little like never before. You're getting the straight dope. The industry has completely reversed itself on that, and probably rightly so. Because the authorized biography is the one where the estate gets to tell you what is truth, and they get to shape that truth, as you just described in the Mind Games booklet. You know, you can have an authorized biography, and folks don't want you to say that now. Because that was giving a sense of credence and truth to the estates that maybe they didn't own, right? That was it fiduciary? Was it commercial? Was it, you know, the Queen example that was given a moment ago, right? Queen was healthily, I'm sure, very well compensated. You know, they're probably not fretting about how accurate they got anything about Freddie Mercury or Brian May or what have you.
I think we would all agree that not having the anthology would be a terrible loss. Yeah.
I use it all the time.
Me too.
Yeah, the video's incredible.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And how do you not love the section about whose idea was Magical Mystery Tour?
Oh, so many great parts.
Well, it's a kind of fiction. It's a conversational.
Yeah.
There are four people talking with each other, but it's not actual conversation.
No.
Somebody that put it into some research and fact or information, as if they were talking to each other over the coffee or drink.
Right.
Yeah, but I try to trust that's a fact.
Right, I think it's a convenience, right? Like we're happy to have it because it's there and we love it because it's from them, but we have to kind of put
Well,
it.
there's contradictions in the same story. And
Of course, but it's like
good to have.
It's like putting on an old blanket, right? Like because it's like them. Oh, it's them, but we have to just look at it a little bit, just a little bit harshly than the other stuff because they contradict themselves in the whole thing. Or that, like we're talking about Shea Stadium. Oh, they said it was 55,000. No, they said it was 65,000.
Exactly.
Or the thing in 8 Days a Week, the documentary that Ron Howard, where Paul's like, we decided while we were in that, you know, that armored car that it was all over.
No.
Come on. What about when you said you'd never tour again last December?
Yeah, right.
Right. So, well, we unfortunately we've run out of time, so I wish we could keep going. We could keep talking with us another hour, but thank you so much for coming. Again, I thank our wonderful panel of distinguished scholars. Thank you so much.